So I'm really excited about this next session. I'm going to be talking with Shavar Jeffries. Shavar was the president of the advisory board for Newark Public Schools. He's also the president of the Democrats for Education Reform. They're a group that promotes more charter schools, school funding, and stricter teacher evaluations to revamp public education, fighting every day on a very important front that's critical to the future success of the workforce. He's also a former assistant state attorney general and was a candidate in the 2014 mayoral race in the city of Newark, New Jersey. He's currently a partner at Lowenstein Sandler, a New York-based law firm. I'm excited. Let's get started with Shavar Jeffries.
I guess to kick it off, Shavar, it'd be great for you to maybe just share a little bit about, I guess, what got you into the line of work you're in, obviously across policy and in the legal profession. What made you do it?
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. Excited to have this conversation. Appreciate all the work you do. What got me into this work, and when I say this work, it's really work at the kind of intersection of civil rights, racial injustice, economic opportunity, educational opportunity, is really connected to kind of my upbringing. I'm from Newark, from the South Ward of Newark. Love the city very much. Amazing people in the city, brilliant people, talented people. And as I was growing up, I didn't really have a sense of college. I didn't really have a sense of kind of life beyond Newark. And my grandmother was a public school teacher. She really was insistent that education opportunity was kind of the key to, kind of me fulfilling my potential. And even though she was a public school teacher at Newark Public Schools, she felt because of the politics in the system, some of the, frankly, bureaucracy in the system, the inefficiency, and the fact that the system at that point in the 70s and the 80s was significantly underfunded, was severely underfunded. So all of those issues combined, she just felt that the public school system in Newark just wasn't aligned with the potential I had inside of me, or frankly, a lot of the potential of the kids in the system generally. So long story short, in 1987, a philanthropist, the great Ray Chambers, who I love, is really a hero to this world, frankly. I mean, the work he's done with the UN and the work he's done not only in Newark, but around the world. He created a scholarship program for about 15 kids in Newark to get scholarships to go to college prep, private high school. So I was one of those kids, and I just saw up close how the type of educational opportunity I had and the rigor and the expectations. So the expectations at Seton Hall Prep, which is where I went to high school, was that every student's going to go to college, and every student's going to go to college and be the best that they could be, not just for themselves, but so that they could be a servant in this world. And I just saw, day by day that I was on a different trajectory because the opportunity I had available to me, and I saw how the kids in my neighborhood didn't have those same opportunities, and so they weren't thinking the same way I was about what college and beyond could mean. So long story short, from there, I'd be the first family to go to college, let alone law school. And I just decided to become a civil rights attorney because I wanted to use these skills that I had been given, and that, of course, I had to work very hard to obtain as well, to make sure that other young people in my city had similar opportunities, to make sure some of the inequities and the kind of opportunity gap that people in cities like Newark face, that they were hopefully remediated so that, every American child can have the same opportunity to fulfill their potential. So that's kind of what got me into this work.
I'm excited. I got a bunch of questions to ask you, so don't. I know we got a short window, but I'm excited given all the work you've done. I want to start off with the kind of topic that we're been rapping about throughout this event, and it's future of work. And one of the things that we've been trying to advocate and talk about is that the future of work is not about work or technology; it's about people. From your perspective, I guess, how do you define future of work, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think about it in a few ways. One, I'm very aware of the fact that the labor market is undergoing many transformations right now. And many of these transformations have been, evolving over many years, a couple decades. I mean, obviously, a city like Newark. Again, I love Newark. Still live here. We used to be a strong manufacturing base in the 60s, 70s. A lot of those jobs left the city into the 80s and 90s. Some of those went overseas. we're very much into, and obviously technology is really disrupting the labor market, and moving much more into a services economy. There's obviously a lot of conversation about technology going to the next level, where a lot of potential blue collar jobs and kind of activity, repetitive type jobs could be replaced by technology over time. And so for me, what it really means is making sure that wherever the labor market is going in this next generation, that we're able to equip everyday Americans with the skills that they need in order to obtain good jobs where they can put food on the table and take care of their families. It means for me making sure that we rethink not only K-12 and higher education, but frankly, continuous learning. Because the labor market is changing at a very fast rate, the jobs that exist today may not be the jobs that exist, forget 5 years from now. They may not be the jobs that exist a year from now, maybe a few months from now. And so it also means for me, we have to have a space where adults can receive ongoing continuous learning at an affordable rate, if not free and subsidized by the public sector, so that as the labor market changes, people can obtain the skills they need to be competitive as the labor market transforms. Right now, I just think there's a lot of gaps. I mean, there's a lot of gaps between what high-paying jobs are looking for in terms of skills and competencies and types of skills that many Americans have. We see oftentimes foreign workers are coming in to fill some of those jobs. We see in our political conversation this plays out, right? I mean, you have many middle-aged people, particularly in all parts of the country. You have people in the cities, you have people in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, where a lot of those manufacturing jobs just aren't there, and people are afraid, right? People are afraid about how they're going to take care of their families. We see opioid use up in the Midwest and in the Southwest. We see in our cities. We see all types, heroin and other types of use up because there's such a despair among many folks. The pandemic is only making this worse. So I really think it's essential that our public sector steps up in a nonpartisan, fact-based way to make sure that there's deep conversations between government and the private sector, where jobs going, where good paying jobs going today and into the future. And then we got to make sure we have a public sector vision that enables people to obtain the skills that they need in order to fulfill those jobs. My fear is too much of the public conversation is very much scapegoating. So rather kind of fact-based, data-based conversation about the labor market and where service sector and technology sectors and frankly just other high-paying jobs are going. We get the blame game. Immigrants are taking my job, or this one is taking my job, and all of that. And that's really just absurd. And that's the kind of politics of division that can keep people distracted from the fact that the labor market is undergoing, dramatic transformations, and we're going to need a kind of evidence-based, calm, objective conversation and set of policies so that we can prepare Americans to deal with that economy.
Well, we have a lot of talent leaders that are going to be attending and watching. They might be a job title like head of learning and development, or head of human resources, head of diversity and inclusion, or head of talent. These roles are responsible for recruiting, onboarding, training, and developing folks. And I found that sometimes the conversation around what's happening in education, or you just mentioned a bunch of things that are happening in our communities. What would you say to that role inside of an organization? Something that they need to know about the state of education as they think about developing and tapping into their talent.
Yeah, I would really encourage people who are in talent roles to not only think about what many already are focused on, which is, how to support the kind of internal HR operations, succession planning, professional development for internal staff, obviously working with management and with subordinates, personnel issues that arise in the workplace, but also to be very intentional about engaging with the public sector, engaging with the university community, engaging with the community colleges in the community where these businesses either are located or where they're pulling talent from or where they're selling services, where the customers are, and really being in deep conversation with those actors in terms of what is it that the company needs today to fill roles that already exist, and where's the company going? Right? What types of skills going forward is the company going to project that it's going to need? And we understand, some you don't know what you don't know. Things can change, but many companies do know some things already. So I think it's very important for people-based folks to really be involved in the external conversation around how do we equip future workers with the skills and competencies they need, so as those jobs become available, employers have a ready pool of talent, ideally from the same communities, either where the company is selling its goods and services or where its headquarters are located, so that you kind of get that integration with your community, and you frankly get the flywheel, right? Obviously, to the extent a company can find great talent down the road, that's going to make that company more successful. They're going to be able to make more money. And then you, of course, get the double net if you're putting dollars in the pocket of workers in the communities, or workers from the communities from which your customers are located. You get that kind of multiplier effect.
Sure. I don't know if you heard, it's an election year, Shavar. Do you know?
No, I didn't hear about that. Is that right?
I guess being an election year, and especially for the folks that are talent or even C-level executives, what are some of the questions that we should be asking, or we should be seeking out the answers to when we're looking at candidates and thinking about how they're going to impact labor and education and workforce and the things if we're serious about future of work, what's our line of questions that we should be seeking the answers to?
Yeah, I really think is essential. I mean, obviously there's a set of questions that different businesses will have around, the regulatory environment for their business, and obviously making sure. I mean, obviously the government has a critical role to make sure that the private sector and that the markets work in a reasonable way and aren't predatory. But obviously, at the same time, entrepreneurs and innovators need room to innovate. So there's a set of conversation that different businesses will have. But on the labor market side, I really think it's essential for anyone who cares about the future work and the future ability of Americans to be able to have gainful employment, to have the conversation around what is the post-secondary vision that we ought to have as a country, or if you're looking at state candidates or local candidates in your state or in your local community, around preparing our residents for the next generation of work, preparing our residents for the future work, right? What are those skills we need? We spend a lot of money in this country on post-secondary education at the community college level, at the four-year college and university level. There's likely there seems to be some bipartisan consensus around making college, whether it's community or four-year and career technical training post high school, free or dramatically more affordable. So there's going to be a lot more money probably coming from the federal government to make these programs more affordable. But we have to demand that not only is the money there, and that's obviously an important piece, but that the right vision and execution is there too. Right? We have to have integrated, organic conversation between companies in terms of what they need and being very clear about that, and then the public sector in terms of matching and aligning those investments where the jobs are going. I tend to think public-private partnerships are the best way to go. I mean, I think the government is very effective as a funder and is reasonably effective in terms of demanding results for those investments. Sometimes there can be challenges when the government is it sets up its own agency to implement, to be frank. I mean, there's a lot to be desired oftentimes with some of the ways in which some of our one-stop job training programs that are run by local or county government. Some people may have a different view. In my experience, they tend not to be that effective. So I tend to like to see public-private partnerships where we can have the job creators of tomorrow, right? Where they can create apprenticeship programs. Maybe the government can fund that. And so as opposed to the government agency actually running the service. So I would say those questions around what is your vision to prepare Americans for the future of work, right? What is your vision for how does the country invest in those training programs so that Americans are ready? Because what we are seeing, I would argue, on one hand, we see one party which tends to focus a lot on putting a lot of money to make training free, or very affordable, which I think is a good conversation. But frankly, less on accountability around results, because we not only want the money spent, it has to work and it has to be invested wisely. Nor do I oftentimes hear conversation from that side around how to actually deliver in a way that actually ensures that Americans not only get the training, but then they get the job placement. And then sometime on the other side, we hear too much, frankly, of a zero-sum conversation. So rather than a fact-based, honest conversation about how technology is disrupting the labor market, how a lot of the jobs of yesterday may not exist tomorrow. I mean, that truck driving job may not be here 10 years from now, may not be here 5 years from now. Many of those jobs in manufacturing plants, to the extent some still exist, may not be here. And it's not because an immigrant or somebody of another racial category is taking some from you because the whole labor market is changing. So let's get you ready for that, right? So that can be maybe a harder conversation, but it's the truthful conversation. So we need a truthful, honest conversation. We got to get away from the zero sum, one group against another, because frankly, if you're a working person or a working poor person, you have so much more in common with everybody else who's a working person than any of these other categories that people are always putting in folks' face. So I would encourage people to focus on the facts of where's the labor market going? How do we get Americans ready for it? How do we hold government investments accountable to make sure people actually be in place and are in jobs where they can put food on the table and take care of their families?
I was watching Representative John Lewis's procession today in D.C. and I want to ask you this, given your experience, like the phrase "good trouble." What kind of good trouble should we be getting in if we're leaders that are trying to create a more inclusive, more equitable workforce? What are the things that you would say to leaders out there?
I would say, and that's a great, of course, John Lewis is such a great model, and people should remember he was first arrested and sent to prison because he just wanted to use a bathroom at a bus stop in Jackson, Mississippi, that was for white people. So he just wanted to pee, right? And just peeing in a certain type of bathroom was subversive, 56 years ago, not even that long ago, right? This is the early 1960s. And then, of course, he was most famous for being beaten brutally for simply walking across a bridge saying Black people should be able to vote in the South, right? And so, which I would argue is just the fundamentals, right? To be able to actually use a public restroom and not be discriminated against because of the color of your skin, or to actually be able to cast a ballot in the country that claims, to be the most successful democracy in the world. And so what I think that means for us today when it comes to inclusion is any of us in positions of authority who are hiring people, who are purchasing goods and services from vendors, you got to have a diverse workforce, right? And if you don't, it's probably a reflection of implicit bias, right? I think most human beings are good people and want to do the right thing. I don't. There are some who are just explicitly and consciously biased against people of different races. I think more often than not, it's more of the implicit unconscious bias, and there's a lot of research that speaks to that. And that just deals with the fact that as Americans, we grow up in a culture in which these biases are just there. They're just baked in, right? I mean, the reason why, not even 60 years ago, it was so problematic for John Lewis to use a restroom that wasn't designated for him was because, of course, the whole cultural idea was these Black people aren't human beings, right? That was the whole point. That was the point for slavery, right? They're not human beings, so they can be enslaved. That was a point for racial apartheid and segregation, Jim Crow, up until literally 1970. I mean, this was legal in this country until the Fair Housing Act in 1968. It was because these are different types of people. So when you have that just kind of in the groundwater, none of us should feel you're gonna have these biases. Black people have them, all types of people have them. Like, sometimes people get very defensive. It's just in the kind of groundwork, right? I mean, I'm an honors grad of Duke University, academic scholarship. When I was walking around campus, people never thought I had an academic scholarship. I can't count how many times, hey man, what do you play? Right? Because it's just images in our culture about who should be doing what. And so the point is, if we want to be inclusive, we first have to do the work of anti-racism within ourselves and within our organizations. There's all types of tremendous consultants who can help organizations with that. And then as we're doing that work, you just have to look at who are you hiring? Who are you hiring in positions of power and authority? Where are you buying your goods and services from? Right? So it's not just who you hire, but who are your vendor relationships? Who are your lawyers? Who are your accountants? Who provide your professional services? And if you're looking around and you're not seeing equity in that, you probably got some work to do in terms of anti-racism. Because what will happen is when you don't do the work, it can be easily rationalized and say, well, I can't find people. Which they're there. People just can't see them oftentimes because these biases, will get in the way. And then the last thing I'll say about the great thing is when you do the work, you're actually going to be a better organization, right? Your work is going to be better, right? So it's not, I would argue on one hand, it's the right thing to do, but maybe even more importantly, you're just going to be better, right? You're just going to be better. My grandfather used to always tell me the story. My grandfather played in the Negro Leagues and I was telling a story about how Branch Rookie came and saw Josh Gibson and Jackie Robinson. Because at that point, people may or may not remember, at that point, the thought was, well, these black people just aren't smart and strategic enough to play baseball at a high level, right? So that was the idea, right? They just can't do it, right? Which again is unsurprising when you have the racial history of who black people were. And of course, Branch Rickey brought in Jackie, in part, not really because he was trying to be some bold person. He's like, I want to go win games. And this kid, Jackie Robinson, is one of the best players I saw. And of course, Jackie quickly comes in the league, becomes MVP, Dodgers win championship. And so part of it is, I don't even make the appeals in terms of some ethical claim, although I think that's there. It's like, you want to win, there's all this talent right out there. And I do think sports is an interesting space because sports, it's so, a lot of bias can play out there, no question. But at a certain point, it can be just so obvious how good people are that it's hard for the biases to deny, greatness, although, they still play a role. And it's like anything else, right? If you only recruit from the state of New Jersey, where I'm from, you'll get certain talent. You recruit from the country, you'll get more talent. You recruit from the world, you get even more. And if you got, 35% of the population in terms of people of color that you're not recruiting from, you're just going to be worse off. So you got to decide, do you want to be the best or do you want to be less than the best?
Sure. It's great, Shavar. I'm asking everybody this one final question for you. So no pressure in this one. What is your hope for the future of work?
That's a great question. My real hope is that the future of work, of course, supports transformational innovations in our world that enable people to live better lives, whether it's transformations in healthcare that allow people to live longer, whether it's other types of interventions that just improve the quality of life of human beings, right? So one, I just hope work is connected to just a better quality of life and better living for human beings, right? So that's number one. So it's beyond just, owners of companies making money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's also that what we do in the labor market and what companies do and what employers do actually makes our lives better. And then secondly, that the future of work happens in a way that the average human being in this world can find work that's fulfilling for that person, and that enables that person to carve out, a quality life as that person would define it. And for me, at minimum, they're able to purchase the fundamental goods and services that I believe human beings should be entitled to. Some shelter, the ability to access healthcare when they're sick, although I also think that, a lot of arguments about how that you shouldn't have to purchase that. That should just be a guarantee. The ability to, put some food on the table for your families, be able to have some recreational ability to just enjoy. So really for me, that work is connected to making people's lives better, and that everyday human beings can find work that's fulfilling and, economically rewarding for that person.
Shavar, I took a page of notes here, man. I really appreciate you sharing your points of view with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.